The room was filled with the usual energy of a Hollywood press event. Cameras clicked, microphones were adjusted, and reporters murmured to each other while checking their notes. The walls were decorated with large posters from Keanu Reeves's latest movie, but the atmosphere was more than just excitement for the film. Everyone knew that when Keanu spoke, he often said things that went beyond the standard questions and answers about his career. He had a reputation for being thoughtful, unexpected, and genuine. As Keanu entered, the room quieted. There was a mix of admiration, curiosity, and a little nervousness. Celebrities often give rehearsed answers in these events, but there was always the hope that Keanu might surprise everyone with something deeper. He smiled politely at the cameras, waved to some of the reporters he recognized, and took his seat at the center of the stage. The interview began like any other. Questions about the movie, his preparation for the role, the experience on set, and his thoughts on working with other actors flowed naturally. Keanu answered them with his usual calm and humble manner, engaging the audience without trying to impress them. Then something unusual happened. The interviewer paused as if trying to feel the right moment and asked, "Keanu, aside from your work in films, who are the people who inspire you the most?" There was a slight shift in the room. This was not a question about acting, stunts, or fame. This was personal. Keanu leaned back in his chair and thought for a moment. The silence stretched not awkwardly, but in a way that made people lean forward. Waiting for his response, he began, speaking softly, but with a voice that carried naturally across the room. "I have always been inspired by people who lead with kindness. People who can hold power or influence but use it to help others rather than just themselves." A few heads nodded, while others scribbled notes quickly. This was already unexpected, but the room leaned in further when he continued. "Recently, I came across someone who really made me pause and think about leadership in a new way. His name is Pope Robert Prevost." The reaction was immediate. Cameras shifted, microphones adjusted. Some reporters exchanged quick, surprised glances. The Pope was not a celebrity from the entertainment world. He was a religious figure, and not just any religious figure, but a newly appointed pope who had been quietly making headlines for his progressive approach to leading the church. Keanu smiled gently as he saw the surprise. He seemed completely calm, completely himself, as if mentioning the Pope was the most natural thing in the world. "I read about him while I was traveling a few months ago," Keanu continued. "I was in Europe for a project, and in between schedules I caught some news about him. What struck me was how he approached his position, not from a place of authority alone, but from a place of humanity. He listens, he cares. He doesn't just make statements. He acts." The room was silent now. Every reporter and photographer wanted to capture every word. Keanu spoke with a quiet authority that didn't demand attention, but naturally drew it. He didn't talk about politics or controversies. He talked about human values, and in a world where celebrities often say things to please or entertain, this was refreshingly honest, I think, he said slowly, choosing each word carefully. "The world needs more examples of leadership like that. Not just in politics or business, but in every sphere. Religion, education, even community work. It doesn't matter how big the platform is. What matters is the intention and the action behind it." He paused for a moment, letting the thought sink in. Some journalists started typing furiously, their fingers flying across keyboards. Social media managers in the back were already noting down quotes that could go viral within minutes. Keanu didn't seem to notice or care about the buzz. He was talking about something that mattered to him personally, and that sincerity was magnetic. "Pope Prevost has done things quietly that most people don't hear about," he continued. "He reaches out to communities that are often forgotten. He talks to people on the streets, listens to refugees, and supports educational programs for children in areas affected by poverty. His actions aren't always in the headlines, but they make a real difference." A few reporters whispered to each other, amazed that a Hollywood star was so knowledgeable and passionate about a contemporary religious figure. Keanu smiled faintly, almost noticing their surprise. "I think it's important to recognize that influence doesn't always come from movies, TV, or social media. Sometimes it comes from the quiet choices of people who are dedicated to helping others, even when no one is watching. That's what I admire most about him." He leaned back, his expression calm but thoughtful. The room stayed silent for a beat longer than usual, the weight of his words filling the space. There was an unspoken understanding that this was more than just an interview answer. This was a glimpse into Keanu's values and the kinds of figures he found inspiring. Some of the reporters adjusted their microphones, trying to get a follow-up question in, but Keanu continued without prompt. It made me think about how we all have the ability to influence others in small and big ways. He said softly, "Even in our daily lives, we can choose compassion over convenience, listening over judging, helping over ignoring. People like Pope Prevost remind me that leadership is not about titles or power. It's about making choices that matter to real people." By now, the energy in the room had shifted completely. What had started as a standard press event for a movie had transformed into a conversation about humanity, empathy, and responsibility. Cameras and recorders captured every expression, every pause, every nuance of his speech. Social media would soon explode with clips and quotes, but in that moment, everyone present felt that they were witnessing something unusual and sincere. Keanu's words didn't just tell a story about the Pope. They told a story about what he believed was worth noticing in the world. They reminded everyone that inspiration often comes from unexpected places, that true influence is measured not in fame, but in actions that lift others. The interviewer, sensing the perfect moment, asked a simple question. "Have you ever met Pope Prevost in person?" Keanu shook his head with a small smile. "Not yet. But even reading about him, seeing what he does, it has left an impression on me. I hope one day to meet him and maybe even learn from him directly." The room exhaled in a way. Everyone felt the weight of his sincerity. It was rare to hear someone in the spotlight speak so naturally without pretense about figures who are not part of their world, but who nonetheless inspire genuine respect. The moment was quiet but powerful. For the next few minutes, the conversation shifted back to lighter topics, the film, the actors, and upcoming projects. But the mention of Pope Robert Prevost lingered in the air. Every person in the room carried the subtle message that leadership, compassion, and quiet action matter. Keanu had reminded them, without preaching, that even those in positions of influence have the power to inspire in ways that go beyond entertainment. By the time the interview ended, the room was buzzing in a new way. Not just with excitement for the movie, but with something deeper. Journalists knew this would become a story far beyond the film industry. Fans and social media audiences would share the clips and quotes. Conversations about leadership, empathy, and the unexpected ways people can make a difference would start to spread. Keanu left the stage with the same calm, humble smile he always wore. He waved politely to the crowd, nodded at the cameras, and exited quietly. But the words he spoke remained. They were small seeds planted in a room full of people who might think differently, act differently, or pay attention to different voices because of a few unexpected sentences from someone known for their movies, but respected for their humanity. In the days following the event, the clip of Keanu mentioning Pope Robert Prevost would be shared millions of times. It would spark discussions, articles, and even news segments analyzing why a Hollywood actor would speak about a contemporary pope with such admiration. But for those who were there that day, it wasn't just a viral moment. It was a rare instance of seeing someone famous speak truthfully, gently, and meaningfully about the real heroes in the world, the ones who lead not by fame, but by compassion, courage, and quiet action. After the interview, the video of Keanu Reeves speaking about Pope Robert Prevost quickly began circulating online. Clips were shared on social media platforms, and news outlets picked up the story almost immediately. Fans and viewers were captivated by the unexpected praise. It was unusual to hear a Hollywood actor openly discuss a contemporary religious leader with such admiration. The interest wasn't just about Keanu, but about why he was moved by someone like the Pope, and what that said about the world's capacity for empathy and compassion. People began to read more about Pope Prevost, discovering stories that were not widely publicized. There were accounts of him visiting refugee camps, listening to the needs of displaced families, and supporting initiatives to provide education to children who otherwise might never have had the opportunity. Each story painted a picture of a man who led quietly, but whose actions were profoundly impactful. Keanu's mention brought these stories to a broader audience, inspiring discussions and sparking curiosity in ways that traditional news coverage had not. In the days following the interview, Keanu received several messages from friends, colleagues, and fans expressing their surprise and appreciation. Many noted that they had never considered looking beyond the world of entertainment to see who was influencing the world in meaningful ways. Keanu responded humbly, saying that he had simply shared what had inspired him personally and hoped that it might encourage others to pay attention to quiet acts of leadership. Meanwhile, journalists and media analysts debated why this moment resonated so strongly. Some suggested it was because people rarely expect celebrities to acknowledge real-world figures outside of their industry. Others believed that Keanu's sincerity, calm demeanor, and thoughtful words cut through the typical noise of interviews, creating a moment that felt authentic and human. Social media users created threads analyzing each sentence of his comments, discussing how leadership, empathy, and compassion are valuable traits not just in global politics or religion, but in everyday life. In the midst of this attention, Keanu remained grounded. He continued with his schedule, promoting his film and attending events, but he made small efforts to highlight stories of real-life kindness and leadership whenever he could. He mentioned local community projects during interviews, shared anecdotes about people helping one another, and even encouraged fans to find ways to make a difference in their own neighborhoods. His reference to Pope Prevost became more than a single statement. It was part of a larger pattern of behavior that showed Keanu genuinely cared about how people impacted the world around them. The story of Pope Prevost began gaining traction internationally. News outlets from different countries highlighted his work, especially his emphasis on helping marginalized communities. Articles featured images of the Pope interacting with children, listening to refugees, and participating in interfaith dialogues. People were moved by how someone in such a position of authority could dedicate time to individuals, rather than just making statements from a distance. It was a reminder that leadership is not measured only by power, but by the actions that create tangible change for real people. Keanu's fans began to engage more with these stories as well. Some shared experiences of volunteering, helping neighbors, or starting small community initiatives inspired by what they had learned about Pope Prevost. Others discussed how even simple acts of kindness in daily life can have ripple effects. Online communities formed to track initiatives led by the Pope and similar figures, creating networks of people who wanted to learn, share, and contribute. Through all of this, Keanu maintained a humble perspective. He never positioned himself as an expert or authority on the Pope's work. Instead, he framed his admiration as a personal reflection on the importance of empathy and action. He often said that while movies can inspire emotions and entertainment, real change happens when people act with compassion, integrity, and awareness of others' needs. This approach resonated strongly because it felt honest, unforced, and deeply human. The conversation around Pope Prevost also inspired intellectual discussions. Universities and think tanks picked up the story, analyzing leadership styles and the psychology of empathy in positions of influence. Scholars noted that the Pope's approach, as described by Keanu, emphasized listening, personal connection, and proactive problem-solving, traits that are often overlooked in traditional leadership training. Workshops and seminars were organized to explore these qualities, with Keanu's interview cited as a catalyst for renewed public interest in humane leadership. Meanwhile, ordinary people were not just observers. Local communities started sharing their own stories of quiet leadership. Teachers spoke about going above and beyond for students. Community organizers highlighted efforts to help those in need. Small business owners discussed initiatives to support employees and neighbors. Each story, in a way, reflected the essence of what Keanu had talked about: that leadership is about meaningful action, not just visibility or authority. The Pope himself took note of the attention. Though he rarely commented on media coverage, he acknowledged the unexpected spotlight that Keanu's mention had provided. In a brief public message, Pope Prevost expressed gratitude for the recognition and emphasized that the work of helping others is a collective effort. He encouraged people to act in their own communities and reminded them that even small gestures of care can create significant impact. The tone of his message was humble, focusing on the people affected rather than on himself. In parallel, the global audience started to see the intersection of influence, action, and inspiration. Keanu's words highlighted that admiration and awareness can come from unlikely sources, and that a simple act of sharing appreciation can amplify real-world good. For many fans, it sparked introspection. They considered who their role models were, not just in terms of fame or talent, but in terms of compassion and tangible contribution to the world. Back in the press circles, reporters reflected on the significance of the event. They discussed how one moment in an entertainment-focused interview had created a bridge to broader humanitarian awareness. The impact was subtle yet powerful. People were discussing empathy, leadership, and action in forums where, previously, such conversations had been rare. Keanu had shifted the dialogue from superficial celebrity commentary to meaningful reflection, showing the potential of thoughtful words in unexpected spaces. During this period, Keanu continued his engagements but took time to connect privately with organizations and individuals working on humanitarian efforts. He visited shelters, spoke with volunteers, and observed initiatives aimed at helping those in need. While he did not publicize these visits widely, insiders reported that he was genuinely invested in learning about how people on the ground were making a difference. It was consistent with the sincerity he had shown during the interview when he mentioned Pope Prevost. The response from fans remained enthusiastic but thoughtful. Social media discussions often centered on how ordinary people could emulate the values Keanu highlighted. Threads emerged sharing simple actions like volunteering, mentoring, donating time or resources, and even listening to someone in need. Each post reinforced the message that leadership and impact are not reserved for celebrities or global figures. They are accessible to anyone willing to act with empathy. As the momentum grew, educational content and media pieces began to emphasize practical lessons from the Pope's initiatives. Videos, articles, and podcasts explored how empathy-driven leadership could influence communities positively. They referenced Keanu's interview as a turning point that brought attention to the importance of moral and humanitarian leadership in a way that was engaging, relatable, and human-centric. In the midst of all this, Keanu continued to maintain his grounded persona. Interviews with him after the event often returned to themes of humility, action, and awareness. He spoke of the importance of noticing the needs around us, of taking small steps toward positive change, and of recognizing that true inspiration often comes from people who quietly act, rather than those who seek attention. His consistent message reinforced the authenticity of the initial interview and deepened the impact of his words. By the end of the week, it became clear that the story was more than a fleeting moment. It had ignited conversations, inspired action, and highlighted the work of someone whose influence might otherwise have gone unnoticed by a global audience. Keanu Reeves's simple but sincere mention of Pope Robert Prevost had transformed a standard press event into a catalyst for awareness and reflection, showing that thoughtful words can resonate far beyond the immediate audience, touching lives and motivating change in subtle, meaningful ways. Weeks after the interview, the attention surrounding Keanu Reeves's mention of Pope Robert Prevost continued to grow. While many expected the initial buzz to fade, the story had taken on a life of its own. The public's fascination was no longer about Keanu, or even about his film. It had shifted entirely to the remarkable actions of Pope Prevost and the surprising way that a Hollywood actor had drawn attention to them. People began sharing detailed accounts of the Pope's initiatives. Stories circulated about his visits to rural communities, where he personally engaged with local families to understand their struggles. He was described as someone who preferred listening over preaching, who asked questions to learn rather than to judge, and who took time to ensure that his words translated into action. Each story, whether told in articles, videos, or social media posts, painted a picture of a leader whose humanity was central to his role. Keanu's fans found themselves inspired in ways they hadn't anticipated. Many commented that his words had encouraged them to look beyond entertainment and to recognize the quiet heroes in their own lives. Ordinary people began discussing who they admired not for fame or wealth, but for their empathy, integrity, and commitment to helping others. Families, students, and communities shared examples of neighbors, teachers, and local leaders who had made a real difference. The conversation became one about the value of small actions, of everyday leadership, and the power of compassion. Journalists who had been skeptical at first started to appreciate the impact. They noticed that the story had moved beyond celebrity news and into something more meaningful. Instead of chasing gossip or sensationalism, They were exploring narratives about social responsibility, humanitarian work, and the ways individuals can shape the lives of others. Keanu's comments had served as a catalyst, providing a bridge between entertainment media and global awareness. Meanwhile, Keanu continued his own quiet efforts. Off the cameras, he visited community centers, spoke with volunteers, and learned more about the challenges people face in different parts of the world. He wasn't seeking publicity. He genuinely wanted to understand. These visits were often done discreetly, without fanfare or media attention, reflecting the same humility he admired in Pope Prevost. Staff and volunteers were struck by his sincerity. He asked thoughtful questions, listened carefully to responses, and sometimes offered small gestures of support. The impact was felt not just in his words but in the way he showed up as a human being. The Pope's work also began receiving formal recognition. Charities, humanitarian organizations, and faith-based groups highlighted his approach to leadership, using it as a model for ethical and compassionate action. Educational institutions incorporated discussions about his methods into courses on leadership, ethics, and social responsibility. Scholars analyzed his emphasis on direct engagement with affected communities, noting that it challenged traditional notions of authority and hierarchy. These analyses often cited Keanu's interview as the moment that brought widespread attention to the Pope's approach. In communities around the world, people began taking action. Some started volunteer programs, while others focused on mentoring or helping disadvantaged children. Social media campaigns encouraged sharing stories of everyday leadership, reinforcing the idea that positive change begins with simple acts. Keanu's words were frequently quoted, but always in the context of real-world action rather than celebrity admiration. It became clear that the focus had shifted entirely to the message of compassion and empathy. At the same time, Keanu participated in interviews where he was asked to elaborate on why he had been moved by Pope Prevost. He explained that the Pope's approach reminded him of the importance of humility, listening, and acting with intention. Keanu emphasized that influence is not about being seen or being celebrated. It's about making choices that have a tangible effect on people's lives. He spoke about the ripple effect of small actions, and how even modest efforts can create lasting change when guided by empathy. The narrative of the Pope's outreach began to include very human stories. There were accounts of families who had received direct support, of children who were given the chance to attend school, and of communities that were empowered to improve their living conditions. Each story highlighted the difference one committed individual could make. Keanu's initial comment acted as a spotlight, but the real heroes were the people who were living and embodying the values of compassion and service every day. As public interest continued to grow, media outlets produced longer feature stories, exploring both the Pope's methods and Keanu's perspective. These pieces included interviews with community leaders, volunteers, and scholars who discussed the significance of action-driven leadership. Many highlighted how the Pope's focus on listening and understanding directly influenced his decisions and the programs he supported. The articles framed the narrative in a human-centric way, emphasizing real-life experiences rather than abstract principles. Keanu's approach to discussing the Pope also became a subtle lesson in communication. He never framed his admiration as instruction or advice. Instead, he spoke from his own perspective, sharing what had inspired him personally. This made his comments feel authentic and relatable. Fans and viewers responded positively, noting that they were encouraged to find their own role models in real life, rather than simply following public figures on social media. The attention also reached global religious communities. Leaders from different faiths noted that the Pope's work exemplified interfaith understanding and cooperation. They praised his willingness to engage with diverse groups, address shared concerns, and support vulnerable populations. The story of his initiatives became an example for how moral leadership could be inclusive, action-oriented, and guided by empathy rather than mere tradition. Throughout all of this, Keanu remained consistent in his message. It was never about him. In interviews and appearances, he often reiterated that the attention should be focused on the work being done, not on who was talking about it. He expressed hope that more people would recognize the value of leading with care and taking concrete steps to improve the lives of others. By emphasizing action over words, Keanu reinforced the authenticity of his admiration. Fans shared stories of their own inspired actions. Some organized local drives to provide food and resources to underprivileged neighborhoods. Others started mentorship programs for children or youth in need. Each initiative was small on its own, but collectively they reflected the ripple effect Keanu had described. The interview had sparked a wave of awareness that encouraged people to see themselves as capable of contributing to meaningful change. The ripple effect even reached other celebrities and public figures. Some mentioned Pope Prevost in interviews or on social media, discussing the importance of empathy and action-driven leadership. This created a broader conversation about moral influence, showing that public recognition can help shine a light on people and work that might otherwise remain unseen. Keanu's simple, thoughtful words acted as a bridge between entertainment, public awareness, and meaningful social impact. Through all of this, Keanu's reputation as a humble, genuine, and thoughtful person was reinforced. People admired not just his talent as an actor, but his willingness to highlight real-world heroes and inspire audiences to think beyond fame and entertainment. The story became an example of how a small moment, a sincere comment in a press interview, could have wide-reaching effects when grounded in honesty, respect, and admiration for meaningful work. In the end, Part 3 of this unfolding story emphasizes the growing awareness and impact of Pope Prevost's actions, magnified by Keanu Reeves's recognition. Communities, individuals, scholars, and fans all engaged with the idea that true leadership is measured by empathy and action. Keanu's comment had catalyzed discussions, inspired personal initiatives, and brought attention to someone whose quiet work was changing lives. The narrative reinforced that one authentic voice, spoken with sincerity, can ripple outward to create understanding, reflection, and real-world change in unexpected and powerful ways. As the weeks went on, the attention to Pope Robert Prevost and Keanu Reeves's comments continued to grow internationally. Stories appeared in newspapers, television segments covered the impact, and social media was buzzing with discussions about leadership, empathy, and real-world action. The coverage focused not just on the fame of the people involved, but on the tangible results of the Pope's efforts and the way Keanu's simple mention had brought attention to them. Journalists began reaching out to organizations that the Pope had supported. They interviewed volunteers, educators, and families who had benefited from his initiatives. Many spoke about how he had personally engaged with their communities, not just sending funds or directives from a distance, but being present, listening, and understanding the real needs of people. These stories were powerful, filled with emotion, and highlighted the human side of leadership in a way that statistics or reports could not. Keanu, meanwhile, remained focused on humility and authenticity. When asked in follow-up interviews why he had spoken about Pope Prevost, he explained that he was inspired by action and sincerity. He emphasized that true leadership and influence are shown through deeds rather than words or titles. Keanu made it clear that he was not an expert on the Pope's work, but he wanted to highlight what he personally found inspiring. This approach made his comments feel genuine and resonant, encouraging audiences to pay attention to the message rather than the messenger. The Pope's acknowledgement of the situation added another layer to the story. In a brief public statement, he expressed gratitude for the recognition, but he emphasized that the focus should be on the people who are helped and on the work that needs to continue. His humility reinforced the values that Keanu had praised and reminded the world that leadership is often most meaningful when it prioritizes others above oneself. Communities around the world responded in tangible ways. Inspired by the attention and the stories of the Pope's actions, volunteers organized new initiatives, fundraisers, and community projects. Teachers, social workers, and local leaders shared innovative approaches to addressing social challenges. Ordinary people also began paying more attention to their own actions, realizing that even small gestures of kindness could ripple outward and make a difference. The narrative became a shared movement of awareness and practical engagement. Social media became a platform for storytelling and sharing personal experiences. People uploaded videos and posts describing their encounters with local leaders, volunteers, or neighbors who had made a difference. The focus was always on real life. The Pope's acknowledgement of the situation added another layer to the story. In a brief public statement, he expressed gratitude for the recognition, but he emphasized that the focus should be on the people who are helped and on the work that needs to continue. His humility reinforced the values that Keanu had praised and reminded the world that leadership is often most meaningful when it prioritizes others above oneself. Communities around the world responded in tangible ways. Inspired by the attention and the stories of the Pope's actions, volunteers organized new initiatives, fundraisers, and community projects. Teachers, social workers, and local leaders shared innovative approaches to addressing social challenges. Ordinary people also began paying more attention to their own actions, realizing that even small gestures of kindness could ripple outward and make a difference. The narrative became a shared movement of awareness and practical engagement. Social media became a platform for storytelling and sharing personal experiences. People uploaded videos and posts describing their encounters with local leaders, volunteers, or neighbors who had made a difference. The focus was always on real-life examples of empathy and action. These stories often referenced Keanu's comments, showing how one thoughtful observation could inspire millions to reflect and take action in their own communities. The global academic community also took notice. Universities and think tanks organized seminars and discussions around leadership, ethics, and the psychology of empathy. Scholars analyzed Pope Prevost's approach to problem-solving and community engagement, exploring how listening, personal involvement, and humility can foster meaningful change. Keanu's mention in the interview was consistently referenced as a turning point that brought widespread awareness and public interest to these discussions. Meanwhile, Keanu continued to quietly engage in his own efforts to learn and contribute. He visited local organizations, spoke with volunteers, and observed programs that supported children, refugees, and marginalized communities. These visits were not publicized extensively, but those who interacted with him noted his genuine curiosity and empathy. He asked thoughtful questions, listened attentively, and reflected on how people were addressing real-world challenges. His presence was a reminder that influence is not only about visibility, but also about care and engagement. As the story unfolded, it became clear that the impact of Keanu's comments and the Pope's work extended far beyond headlines. Ordinary people were inspired to think critically about leadership and the importance of human connection. Online communities shared resources, advice, and encouragement to help those in need. Local initiatives emerged in neighborhoods across different countries, driven by the idea that anyone could contribute in meaningful ways. The narrative also began to highlight the importance of empathy in leadership. The Pope's approach, as described in interviews and media coverage, emphasized understanding the experiences of others, respecting diverse perspectives, and responding with action rather than words alone. Scholars and commentators noted that these qualities, often overlooked in traditional leadership discussions, were crucial for creating sustainable, positive change in communities. Keanu's observation served as a bridge between the abstract concept of empathy and real-life examples that people could relate to and learn from. Throughout this period, media coverage maintained a human-centric focus. Stories featured the people whose lives had been directly affected, from families and children to educators and community organizers. The emphasis was always on the tangible outcomes of the Pope's initiatives and the quiet, but powerful ripple effects that followed. This approach kept audiences engaged and connected, avoiding sensationalism while highlighting authentic experiences. Keanu's consistent message of humility and sincerity reinforced the narrative. He often reminded audiences that while recognition and attention can be helpful, the work itself is what matters most. He encouraged people to notice acts of kindness around them, to support local initiatives, and to consider how they could make a difference in their daily lives. His approach resonated with fans and observers because it was relatable, actionable, and rooted in genuine care. The story of Pope Robert Prevost and Keanu Reeves' mention also inspired creative projects. Artists, filmmakers, and writers began exploring themes of empathy, leadership, and community engagement. Some produced short films highlighting real-life heroes in their communities, while others wrote articles, essays, or social media content to share personal stories of compassion and action. This creative response further amplified the message and reinforced the idea that inspiration can come from many sources. As public interest remained high, the global conversation about leadership and empathy grew more nuanced. Discussions emerged about how to integrate these values into education, workplace culture, and community development. People explored practical ways to foster understanding, support marginalized populations, and create inclusive environments. The momentum, sparked by a single thoughtful comment in an interview, continued to expand, showing how meaningful dialogue can inspire widespread reflection and positive action. Keanu's involvement remained subtle but influential. He continued to promote awareness and engagement without seeking personal credit. His interviews and public appearances consistently reinforced the message that inspiration comes from observing and appreciating acts of compassion, whether performed by prominent figures like Pope Prevost or by ordinary people making a difference in their communities. His approach created a sense of authenticity and trust, encouraging people to engage with the stories and initiatives on a personal level. In summary, Part 4 of the story focuses on the broadening impact of Keanu Reeves's mention of Pope Robert Prevost. The narrative highlights the global attention, the human stories, the community engagement, and the ongoing dialogue about leadership, empathy, and action. The story emphasizes the ripple effect of authentic recognition, showing how a single sincere comment can inspire millions, spark meaningful conversations, and motivate individuals to make positive changes in their own lives and communities. Through this, the story remains human-centric, engaging and deeply relatable, encouraging audiences to reflect, act, and connect with the values of empathy and compassion in their daily lives. The story reached its peak as the weeks turned into months, with Pope Robert Prevost and Keanu Reeves's unexpected connection continuing to inspire people across the globe. The attention that started with a simple comment in a live interview had blossomed into a movement of awareness, reflection, and action. It was no longer just a news story. It had become a story about humanity, compassion, and the ripple effects of genuine admiration. Keanu continued his daily life, but he remained mindful of the attention his words had brought. He did not seek further publicity or accolades, choosing instead to quietly observe the changes that were happening as a result of the awareness he had helped create. He received letters, emails, and messages from people who shared their stories of inspiration. Teachers wrote about incorporating lessons of empathy in classrooms. Volunteers shared projects they had started in their neighborhoods, and ordinary people described moments when they chose kindness over convenience because they felt moved to act. The Pope himself maintained a humble perspective. In his speeches and messages, he continued to emphasize the work being done by ordinary people in local communities. He reminded the world that while recognition could shine a light on efforts, it was the consistent, quiet actions that truly mattered. His approach to leadership and engagement remained focused on listening, understanding, and taking action, values that had resonated with Keanu and millions of others. Educational institutions began using the story as a case study in leadership programs. Students analyzed the Pope's approach to community engagement, learning how empathy, listening, and personal involvement could create sustainable change. They discussed how these lessons could be applied in their own communities, workplaces, and personal lives. Keanu's comments were often cited as the catalyst that brought attention to these principles, showing how one voice of sincere admiration could spark learning and reflection on a global scale. Communities around the world were inspired to create programs that addressed local challenges. Small initiatives, from mentoring youth to providing resources for families in need, began to multiply. Social media posts documented these efforts, creating networks of people who encouraged each other to take action. The conversation was no longer about celebrity or fame. It was about what individuals could do to make their communities better, drawing inspiration from real-life examples of compassion and leadership. Keanu occasionally participated in interviews where he discussed the importance of action-driven inspiration. He emphasized that while recognition and awareness could be powerful, the true measure of influence was the effect on the people being helped. He shared anecdotes from his own experiences visiting communities, speaking with volunteers, and observing projects that were making a difference. These stories reinforced the human-centric message of the entire narrative and inspired viewers to reflect on their own capacity to contribute positively.